Okay, welcome back. It is early July 1874. We left off in February. I should apologize, it has been some significant time since the last video. There's been some real life stuff that's been really busy. I had a couple of people move into the house that I live in, so I had to engage in some pretty frantic tidying and decorating. And then thereafter, it occurred to me that a lot of the videos I make sort of really late at night at like sort of 1 in the morning, you know, when it's very quiet and peaceful and there's no roar of traffic outside. And it occurred to me I can't really stick my headphones on and shout into a microphone at 1 a.m. With people having moved in. So yeah, I've kind of kept putting off and delaying making this video. But anyway, there have been some interesting developments since February. So the last report was a much longer report. Obviously, it was intended as a kind of comprehensive Army and Navy review, which is what it was, and that was a good kind of 40-minute video. This is more likely to be probably a more curt kind of business report, but there is some stuff to cover. So first of all, you can see from our sort of reports here that we're now in the midst of an economic crisis. I think it triggered last turn, so it triggered kind of at the end of June, and it hasn't arrived in the Ottoman Empire yet. I think this is only the second economic crisis that we've seen, I believe, or maybe the third. I think it's only the second one. I don't know what its intensity is going to be. Our economy is in fairly good shape to weather any such storm. We're now running at 3% inflation, down from 5% about a year ago, so inflation has been kind of on a downward trend. I had a kind of gut instinct that this might have been on the cards. I've been looking at kind of our economic indices, and over the last year, there's kind of like, I mean, domestic market sales have generally kind of plateaued anyway, but they were starting to decline a little bit, which I thought's weird. I kind of thought, why? I mean, the population's presumably growing, as you know, but also exports. I mean, this particular turn is not bad for exports, but exports generally have been a bit kind of anemic. The economy isn't growing at the same pace that it was, but that was always to be expected, you know. So at some point, the economic crisis will arrive in the Ottoman Empire. Factors for kind of intensity of economic crisis and longevity and stuff like that tends to reflect your kind of economic model. Ours is state control. The Ottomans didn't really have a state-controlled economy, of course, in the 1870s, but I suppose really, I mean, you could kind of say that, like, this is what would be termed as kind of state capitalism. So, for example, Japan was kind of like a state capitalist, you know, Japan in the late 19th century, Imperial Germany. So the state played a really big role in kind of like guiding large conglomerates. So in Japan, you had the kind of guiding of the zaibatsus by the imperial government. And I think the Ottomans probably had something fairly similar going on. So I suppose state control in the period of classic laissez-faire economics is not like a planned economy like the Soviet Union, or, you know, our 20th century idea, or, you know, 21st century as we are now, but a 20th century idea of state control would be a planned economy or a command economy. In the 1870s, it means the state is guiding economic development. So anyway, yeah, this reflects the intensity. So kind of completely free market economies like Britain, probably the United States depicted in game, although reality, the United States during this period was not a kind of pure laissez-faire, had very protectionist. It probably would have been not a mixed economy, but the state actually was heavily involved in the economy in America in the late 19th century, or at least it insulated the American economy through pretty tough tariffs and quotas, you know. But yeah, countries that are more kind of laissez-faire, they tend to feel the effects of these economic crises much more, whereas state intervention, as in the case of the Ottomans, means that the intensity of the crisis can be kind of mitigated and offset through state intervention. So if it's a really big economic crisis, we still will have, we still will feel the effects. You know, we could be looking at a jump in inflation that ranges anything from like 5 to 10%. In the multiplayer game as Russia, where we've had a couple of economic crises. The first one was really severe, was really brutal. And bear in mind that Russia also has a similar kind of economy to the Ottomans. I think it has kind of like a bit of kind of state intervention, you know. In terms of my multiplayer Pride of Nations game, I've come to the conclusion that I'm not going to be able to depict it. There's just no way of doing it, unfortunately. There's no way. Even if there was a delay in real life of a year, which maybe in game years is like 5 years, there's nothing I could really depict meaningfully. I couldn't really talk about my broad strategy or plans or ideas without compromising my game. There's no way that I could do it without compromising allies by revealing the position of their units. And okay, this is obviously a very small channel depicting a very niche game. It's never going to be a big channel. Oh, it looks like the Carlists are kind of causing trouble in Southeast Spain. But yeah, I mean, like, this doesn't have a big following. But then Pride of Nations has a very kind of sort of small player base, I'd imagine. So it would, you know, it only takes one player to stumble across it, and all of a sudden you can get upset allies. There's just no way of doing it. However, I am going to depict a multiplayer game of another game. It's SGS Africa Corps. It's pure military strategy. It's a much shorter game. I can start uploading. I've not started the game yet, but I can start uploading those videos sort of, you know, once the game's halfway done, because it's pure military strategy. There's no kind of diplomacy or anything like that. So by the time the game's half done, I mean, the game's only going to last a month probably, or a couple of months, I'd imagine, at max. And it's long odds on me being victorious, I'm afraid. The player that I'm going up against is in the Wargaming Club, as I am, and he's a very seasoned, experienced kind of strategy player, you know, ground strategy player, so there's a good chance I'll lose, and I'll lose big. But anyway, I'm going to try and depict that on this channel alongside my Ottoman solo game. Now, back to the Ottoman solo game. Yeah, I mean, like, the economic crisis hasn't hit us yet. We'll see what happens. In terms of exporting capital, which is the main way that we unload private capital now, to stop massive kind of concentration, accumulation, we're at a limit in terms of really what we can do domestically. You'll notice that we are stockpiling a significant amount of coal. Our economy is big enough now that we can stockpile huge amounts of coal without sort of suffering from kind of wastage or anything like that. So, yeah, we're not suffering a kind of wastage. We're importing as much coal. I mean, like, the amount of elasticity in the international market for coal is much greater than I thought. I honestly thought that we'd very, very quickly have, like, an international coal shortage. That is not the case. We're hoovering up a huge amount of coal. We've got a large stockpile, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to really just try and maintain about 1,000 coal. So at some point soon, I'm going to begin to kind of like slim, and we're importing more than 100 units of coal per turn. It's crazy, you know. Yeah, so at some point soon I'm going to begin to slim down those kind of imports to try and ensure that we're basically meeting demand. And if there's a coal shortage, we have this kind of buffer that we can eat into. We've got over 1,000 stockpiled. That should probably buy us a couple of months. I mean, coal is the lifeblood of like 19th century industrial economies. You know, it's like as important then as, I suppose, oil is to our world today. We are continuing to kind of like invest in China. A lot of these investments are lost. They just go over to the control of the Chinese. Like, pretty much all of the RGOs in Shanghai were built by us. A lot of the ones that seem to be in Chinese mainland are the ones that go over to Chinese control very quickly. So the tea plantations in Fuzhou province, for example. But the areas that are outside the kind of mainland, so for example on the island of Formosa, we've got one coal site. There's no railroads there, but it is a modern coal pit. They remain in Ottoman control, which is interesting. That also seems to be the case for the most part in places like the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria also. We're building a coal site in Pyongyang, and we've constructed a timber site. We're going to continue kind of developing China. For all the reasons mentioned previously, you know, there's, in terms of geopolitics, real benefits. You can see in Manchuria as well, we've got some timber sites. These seem to be kind of, I mean, they're not very productive. You know, this is a very undeveloped region. China is very poor, very undeveloped. There's no railroads. There are some major roads here, however, like, but yeah, it's, you know, it'll be a long time. I mean, if we retain control of all of these sites, when railroads do start appearing in China, you know, this would be a noticeable boom. As it is, these are very remote, unproductive kind of timber sites. But they are controlled by Ottoman capitalists. So we're going to continue investing in China. I mean, if we manage to kind of, you know, create a China that can punch a little bit more than it could during this period. I mean, China is big, and it has the political cohesion necessary for it not to be a complete, you know, kind of like a complete victim. I mean, it kind of was during the period. But it can't be kind of diced up and colonized in the way that Africa can, for example. You know, it has a kind of it has a fairly sophisticated kind of central government. But there are certain areas, for example, Manchuria, the Korean Peninsula, Mongolia. There are certain areas where China, they're kind of depicted as colonies. They weren't really colonies, but I suppose in the same way that the Ottoman Empire has certain areas that are depicted as colonies, like the Middle East and the Levant. I suppose what it really reflects is the rather tenuous control that the central government has over those areas, and that's the case of China and places like Formosa, Manchuria, and the Korean Peninsula. But we are going to continue investing in China for sure. A couple of our Academy of Sciences investments have started paying off. We've just managed to get ironclad corvettes. Now, we already had ironclad corvettes, but we had a slightly earlier variety. So the new ironclad corvettes that we have really now means that we can kind of, almost mass produce these things. They replace the slightly older model. I couldn't really see any difference. I couldn't see any difference in terms of the stats between the new ones. So if we look at the kind of the old ones, I think this is a new one that's just being constructed. So these are the kind of the first variety. I looked at these stats, and they're actually slightly higher because they're in a fleet. But there's no difference between these, from what I could tell, and the kind of new ones. It may become obvious once new ones are built and they're stacked into a fleet, because these kind of indices, or these statistics they're influenced slightly by command and stuff like that, so it might become a little bit clearer. My hunch is that the newer variety is just going to have slightly, their offensive and defensive is likely to be the same, but they might have a slightly higher discipline, or, I guess where the crews have just become much more familiar with the engineering and this kind of thing. We'll see what happens, but anyway, we got ironclad corvettes. Now, the other big thing is steel breech-loading artillery, which is exciting. So if we go over to example to our Eritrean division, have a look at the Field Artillery Regiment. There we go, very cool new graphic. And this is contemporary artillery. This is 1870s to 1890s, I think, artillery. So yeah, we've kind of done it. We've caught up in terms of artillery. It's amazing to think how different this artillery is compared to the artillery in like 1850, which is 24 years ago. The artillery that we're seeing now it's like a whole new. This is the modern era of artillery that we're entering into, and this will change. This will really, really change the name of the game when it comes to warfare, because from this period onwards, I think increasingly artillery is going to be the kind of queen of the battlefield. The industrial age, really. Artillery was always potent, but the industrial age places artillery into this kind of central role. Like the power of explosive shells, the range of artillery, and also, sort of complex artillery matrices allow for much more accurate artillery fire. Means that the lethality of artillery is greatly increased. Warfare is becoming a much more scientific business. In some ways we're still in the age of kind of brass buttons and colourful uniforms, but that stuff is going to be soon, is becoming replaced by firepower. My hunch is that's gonna leave a lot less room for maneuver in the battlefield. Like the really flash kind of campaigns. I'm thinking of, the campaigns of characters like Omar Pasha. These things might increasingly be kind of put to the past. Like warfare is going to become, I think, much more bloody, much more gruesome, and what's going to be important, I think, increasingly in warfare is going to be a strategic reserve, replacements, and this kind of thing. And this really remained the case. There are exceptions, of course. Obviously the First World War was quintessentially a kind of an artillery war of endurance. The Second World War, which is of course the biggest war in human history, is a bit of a break from that tradition, because the development of armor and combined arms and stuff allows for incredible mobility. But then arguably, if you look at the contemporary conflicts today, you could say that that artillery has kind of returned to that preeminent position that it was emerging into in the 1870s. So it's a big step for us. The fact that we were so behind in terms of artillery. We started this game with like bronze Napoleonic artillery, and we now have artillery guns that are among the most modern designs in the world. Our artillery guns, Krupp ain't got nothing on us. Look at these things. Oh, okay, really annoyingly, these graphics, this always happens, I don't know why. It's like a kind of game bug here, so it won't let us actually look at the, maybe some other time, huh? It won't let us look at, let's see if I try and look at something else. Right, okay. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. I think it's a monstrosity. So we've got now 2 varieties of howitzer, it seems. I don't know what the 2 varieties do, really. I guess one is more of a mobile one or something. I'll have to look at the drilling on the details. And this is regular field artillery battalions, which is slightly offset for some reason. Curiously, we seem to now have a variety of... Well, let's check these out. This thing is insane. Check this coastal gun out. That thing is absolutely... Yeah, very, very cool. Yeah, we can't build it, but it seems that... let's have a look. The some of our artillery is now listed as light artillery. Now, this is exciting, because you remember that we had loads of light artillery guns that were really small Napoleonic guns. I'm wondering if that's these upgraded. I wonder if that's like an option, because it doesn't seem that we have any of those guns anymore. So my hunch is that even the really old, small, and these are things that are going to be like, you know, they're going to be as high as you need. These are going to be like very, very small guns. Like these, for example. These are the light... We basically got these. We couldn't construct these. These were early modern guns that we mostly got from Yemen. We just kept them. Because they're surprisingly effective, even though they're very small guns. These are very small Napoleonic kind of like, yeah, sort of bronze kind of style guns. I think they can be upgraded now because you'll notice that the designation here is that this is light artillery. I don't know. It'll become clear in time. But anyway, yeah, we're in the artillery business now. And yeah, that's good to see. We'll see what happens. We'll see how much of an impact this will have. In the next war, and talking of the next war, you'll notice that the map is looking a little bit crazy. Russia declared war on Austria. Russia's initial invasion, it declared war on Austria a couple of months ago. Russia's initial invasion was very successful. It penetrated quite deep, quite quickly, but it got a massive army that looks to be isolated in kind of Transylvania. The Russians have fairly large forces, huge numbers of supply wagons, but it looks like the Austrians are counterattacked. They haven't taken the cities. These might just be cavalry brigades that have pushed through, but yeah, they control some ground in the interior. We'll see how this war unfolds. And the reason this is exciting is because this has just happened, like, about a month ago, this war started. And looking at the foreign ministry, scroll down painfully slowly. Our peace treaty, 0 turns. Our peace treaty with Austria is about to expire. Now, we can't do anything. We don't have diplomatic resources. The hope is that Austria does something crazy. If Austria declares war on us, whilst they're kind of, whilst they're tied up with Russia, which they have done before, you know, as crazy as it is, that would really give us, you know, a kind of once in a decade chance to put the kind of hurting on Austria that we had intended. Now, the last war with Austria was very touch and go. It was very tough. And, you know, that gives us an idea as to what future wars are going to be like. You know, the kind of good old days feel like they're over a little bit in terms of us having some kind of real maneuver advantage. Maybe because the development of modern weapons and stuff like that is making warfare just much more costly, much harder to kind of get that maneuver off. But if Austria is tied up with Russia, then, I mean, the plan is obviously for us to remove Austria as a factor at events by reducing them to being a kind of German principality, really. And we would do that. We would absolutely do that. So the hope is that Austria, Austria sort of, for some bewildering reason, declares war on us again. I mean, Austria is basically hardwired, I think, to press Bosnia-Herzegovina. We've obviously taken a territory, I think it's Fiume. Yeah, I think this is Fiume. Like, they're kind of hardwired to press this territory as well. So they're just going to, you know, I think obsessively declare war on us. Plus, we control all of Romania. So Austria is going to, I think, just be, very aggressive until we put them in a position where we're basically permanently at war with them. Now, because of our ongoing guerrilla campaigns in Greece and in Romania, our national morale is atrophying. It's low. We get little bounce backs every now and again, but it's going to remain fairly low, and it might continue to atrophy. Once it gets low enough, it means that the wars in Greece and in Romania, the occupations, if you like, will automatically end. But they have to be very low for that to happen. So we'll keep an eye on that. But an outbreak of hostilities with Austria, under favourable conditions, would allow us to very quickly claw back national morale. An occupation of Vienna, for example, would give us national morale that would last us for, give us basically another decade of occupation of Greece and Romania, during which time the opportunity may present itself to actually impose terms upon these kind of micro-states, or at least for, I don't know, maybe the stars to align in such a way as to allow them to offer us terms, I mean, we could just offer them a white peace, theoretically, but I don't really see the point, really. Might as well just occupy them, I think, now. And yeah, getting like 150 national morale would buy us a lot of time to be able to keep those occupations down. So hopefully the Austrians, but they still have fairly substantial forces in the south, but hopefully the Austrians decide that they want to kick off, We'll see if that comes to pass anyway. We'll see what happens. If they do, there's a good chance they will next turn. Beyond that, I'm going to quickly click through the reports to see if anything jogs my memory. No, I think beyond that, there's nothing else significant to report. We've had some insurgencies in kind of the southern part of Libya, and Siwa and Amal. We've kind of dealt with those. We have small mobile forces that have been kind of dealing with that. But yeah, it's not much we can do about that. There's this kind of terra incognita in southern Libya that we can't open up. At some point, Europeans might sort of do that for us, especially if we give like transit rights to, I don't know, France or Britain. I mean, they've started exploring some of the interior, some parts of Africa. You can see, for example, the Zaire is starting to open up. I think South Africa's been pushed north a little bit. We'll see what happens, but yeah, if Africa can be kind of opened up, I think the interior of Libya. Let me check colonial map mode. I think it's like a colony in its own right. It's quite right as well that it's not exposed, because even when the Italians took this area in 1912, they never really controlled the interior. Yeah, it is Sahara. It's a British unclaimed territory. That just means that Britain might have like 2%, colonial influence there. Or they might not. I think it might just be that it's British unclaimed because Britain has this as a kind of an object of interest. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's Sahara. Bear in mind that during this entire period, the period depicted in this campaign, this southern area, this interior of Libya, was not really controlled by any European power. I think the Italians only ever really... It's only in the kind of 20s, during the campaign of... I think it was Graziani, actually. It was Rodolfo Graziani, the Italian kind of general, the butcher of Libya, waged a campaign against the Senussi. And Omar Mokhtar was, I think, the insurgent. That he was eventually captured, arrested, and killed. There's a good film depicting that, actually. Lion in the Desert. And I say good film, it's a 70s film, but it's, it's comfort viewing good. But yeah, check it out. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. There's not much else to report. There's a very good chance. Now, I'm aware that it's been 2 weeks. It's not going to be 2 weeks again. I'm going to try and keep the tempo of the uploads to being a little bit more sensible. This is a relatively brief kind of business report. I'm going to try and make sure there's another report up within a sort of few days, and try and keep them to sort of at least once every 4 or 5 days from now on. Can't always promise that, but like, yeah, I'd like to do that, because also for my benefit, I don't really want to leave the game for like a week and then go back to it. And although that hasn't really happened in this case, I've been uploading the game periodically, familiarizing myself with it, and just kind of, just contemplating. Sometimes I just load the game up, put some nice music on, have a scroll through the map, hatch some plans, and this sort of thing. But yeah, the next report could very well be literally in 2 weeks' time in the game. In real life, it'll be a few days' time, because there's a chance that Austria might declare war. If Austria is just hardwired to act like a kind of, sort of genocidal maniac, then yeah, they might declare war straight away as soon as the opportunity presents itself. If not, the next update will be a quarterly update, so it'll probably be in the kind of autumn. In real life, it will still be a few days' time. But yeah, until then, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.